On this channel, I have been trying to shed light on the current state of the art and the menaces it is facing, such as AI, the economical situation, the industry structure, and maybe a bigger plan to reduce it exclusively to hollow entertainment. However, I have not really dug into explaining why caring and fighting for the art is important. I mean, why should we care? How much of a problem could this really be if we lose it? And is a lot shorter to answer for once. Art is not important for its beauty, but for its power. In this video, I will tell you the story of 3 pieces of art to display just how powerful art really is. As well, we shall see that sometimes an image is worth 1,000 words. So buckle up if you think that being an artist is inoffensive. I assume that some of you will recognize this opera, whether you appreciate it or not. But did you know that this specific opera provoked an entire revolution? And not any revolution, the revolution that led to the birth of my own country, the Belgian Revolution. Being Belgian and creating a video about the power of the arts, I ought to start the subject by telling you the story of La Muette de Portici. In the early 1800s, Belgium was not yet a country, and it was part of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. However, this union, born from the defeat of Napoleon, was not really a successful one. On the one hand, you had the Dutch, who spoke Dutch and were majoritarily Protestants. On the other hand, you had the Belgians, who were mostly Catholics, and their elite spoke French. So the 2 parts were fundamentally different and had different interests and culture. Overall, the Belgians felt dominated by the Dutch in every aspect of society, and their freedom of speech was next to inexistent at the time. In 1830, the economical situation in Europe was overall pretty bad, which worsened the tension already present in the country. And so, on the night of the 25th of August 1830, the King, Guillaume I, made his biggest mistake. He underestimated the power of art. For his birthday celebration, he requested the performance of the then newly written Auber's opera La Muette de Portici in Brussels. Although his generals advised the king against it, he didn't see how the performance of a simple opera would be anything other than a nice and joyful distraction for his people. However, under its inoffensive disguise of a romantic tale, this opera swarms with highly revolutionary speeches, telling the uprising of the people of Naples against the Spanish occupation of 1647. These catchy melodies with highly patriotic lyrics started to resonate with the Belgians in the room, leaving the audience agitated as the show went on. Lyrics such as, "I would rather die than to stay miserable. To my country I owe my life, and it will owe me its freedom." Or even, "Rise up, comrade, they try to oppress us," started to be chanted from every corner of the room. Suddenly, the energy was such that the public all started to rise against the king and stormed out in the streets of Brussels. The civil uprising started, and we began to count the dead. Only 3 days later, the Dutch armies fled Brussels and the south of the country. And only a few weeks later, Belgium declared its independence. New borders, a new government, and millions of lives changed forever, all inspired and provoked by a simple opera. In a country in which there was almost next to no freedom of speech, an opera resonated louder than we could have ever imagined, and it motivated a whole population to go out in the streets and fight for their freedom and their independence. This is the power of art. For the second story, I am bringing you to Spain, 1937. The Spanish Civil War had been going on for 6 months when the Spanish government commissioned Picasso to paint a large-scale mural for the Spanish Republic Pavilion at the 1937 World's Fair in Paris. Picasso was then the most famous painter in the world, and he was also outspokenly apolitical. This commission was then quite tricky for him, and he didn't really find any inspiration for it for months. However, everything changed on the 27th of April of that year, when he opened his newspaper to find devastating images of the massacre that happened in Guernica, the small Spanish village he was originally from. The previous day, ordered by Franco's fascist regime, 25 German warplanes dropped 100,000 pounds of explosive and incendiary bombs on the small village for 3 hours straight, with tactical timings to maximize the civilian casualties. The whole village was reduced to rubble, and a third of its population sadly died under the attacks. The brutal and unprovoked attack shocked the world. Picasso, finding the images of his village completely massacred, was heartbroken. He then began to paint. This is then that he created his famous painting Guernica, which is still one of his most famous works to this day. This enormous 4 by 8 meter painting was made in only 3 weeks. This is an intentionally chaotic scene, presenting the brutality of war, destruction, death, screams, fear. This painting almost screams at us. The absence of color reminds us of a scene reported on the news, which was only reported in black and white at the time, of course. Inspired by Rubens' paintings compositions, as well as the other world-famous anti-war painting The 3rd of May, we can see the several compositions of this masterpiece depicting the horror of war. From the bull representing the fascist regime and brutality, looking at us straight in the eye, to a crying mother with her dead child in her arms, a dead soldier on the floor with the martyr's marks on his hand, the screaming and terrorized horse representing life, a woman trapped in a burning building, and the injured woman looking at the only source of light of the scene, the lamp, representing hope. However, one of the most interesting parts of this painting for me is the light bulb eye at the top of the painting. It is said to represent the technology that caused the destruction of Guernica. It is also worth noting that light bulb in Spanish is bombilla, which reminds us of the word bomb. However, this is where this painting is absolutely genius, as if we see it as technology instead of strictly the word bomb, this painting is even more relevant to this day. Although it was inspired by the massacre of Guernica, it is, of course, an allegory of all wars, and this painting was to denounce the brutality and horror of tragedy, of war in general. When it was shown at the Paris Expo, the reception was quite mixed, and it was not seen as a masterpiece straight away, as it was seen to be too avant-garde. However, after the expo, the painting was transported all over the world to raise money for the Republican cause. Then the appreciation started to grow. In 1939, the painting was sent across the globe a second time to raise money for the refugees of the fascist regime this time, which brought further attention to the painting. It was then moved to the Museum of New York, where it stayed on display for the next 40 years before returning to Spain after the death of Franco. While Picasso was living in occupied Paris during the Second World War, it is said that a German officer entered his house and saw a photograph of Guernica on his wall. And so he asked Picasso, "Did you do that?" And Picasso replied, "No, you did." But it is in the 1970s, during the Vietnam War, that Guernica truly became an anti-war symbol used everywhere. In fact, a representation of the painting was even displayed at the United Nations. But in 2003, after the Bush administration argued for war on Iraq, it was ordered by the US administration to cover up the painting. And so this is the point of this story. If art had no power, then why would you want to cover it up? The last story I wanted to tell in this video to display the power of art is not about one of those masterpieces known and respected by the whole world. For this tale, I will need you on the other side of the screen to take on the storytelling this time. As this is the story of this book that changed your vision of the world. This tale that inspired you to achieve something difficult. This is the story about this painting or even this child drawing that moved you to your core and brought tears to your eyes. It is the story about that song that spoke to you so deeply and personally in a moment that you needed it the most, that it helped you overcome something difficult in your life. It is the story of that piece of art that helped you get over one of those times when you felt helpless, lost, stuck, misunderstood and alone. But that piece of art suddenly brought sense to your situation. It made you feel less lonely and gave you that piece of advice, that emotion, that clarity or that motivation you needed to overcome those feelings and move forward. For an artist, there is nothing more rewarding than knowing that our art helped someone, somewhere, somehow. Because this is when we see the true power of our art, and it makes it all worthwhile. And if you've watched this video until now, then I invite you to share the story about that piece of art in the comments, as it would be the greatest display of the power of art on an individual level. As we saw earlier in this video, underestimating the power of art can be a fatal mistake to make. I believe that with the current level of censorship seen across the globe, especially in regions of conflict, the active defunding and the fast disappearing education and appreciation for human art, that the powerful people don't underestimate the power of art. I'm however scared that the general public has been taught to do so and are now forgetting and underestimating its real power. If we lose art and its potential, then we essentially lose our most powerful weapon against tyranny, war, and oppression. But we will also lose an essential tool on a more individual level, essential for healing and self-growth. I hope that this video will help to restore the value art really has, and that it will encourage some of you to cherish it for its true value and power once more. Because if an American administration is scared of a painting, then what could 1,000 paintings do? Thank you for watching until the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to subscribe and like, as it truly helps small new channels like this one. Thank you all for your support so far, and most importantly, keep creating and stay weird.